I would now like to welcome our witnesses for our second panel. In person, Halifax Port Authority, Captain Alan Gray, President and CEO. By video conference, Shield Automotive Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, Maitra Mirhasani, Professor. Up to 5 minutes will be given for opening remarks, after which we will proceed with rounds of questions. I now invite Captain Gray to make an opening statement, please.
Thank you. We at the Port of Halifax recognise the importance of this issue and sympathise with the thousands of Canadians who have been impacted by these criminal acts. We join Canadians in our concern over the growing problem of auto theft, which has become a very sophisticated crime, and those involved are highly organised. We are committed to working with the government and other supply chain stakeholders to address this issue and broader concerns surrounding the illicit movement of goods and/or people. Canadian port authorities are delegated with specific and limited responsibilities for port security. Therefore, ports must work closely with their partners, including local police, federal enforcement authorities and Canadian Border Service agencies, to achieve security. When it comes to illicit activity, which also includes illegal drugs and human trafficking, there is no single solution to this problem. There are many groups that each have a role to play in terms of enforcement and prevention, and developing a strategy which involves all groups working together is necessary. For many years now, I have worked closely with the International Maritime Organisation, or IMO, and I can tell you that port security has been on the radar for a long time. At the start of the century, ports used to be open environments, but 9/11 changed all that. The IMO developed measures designed to combat terrorism, not specifically contraband, but continued to focus on security in a holistic way. The International Ship and Port Facility Security Code was adopted in 2004, and following that, the IMO continued its work on maritime security. The IMO Code of Practice on Security in Ports offers a valuable framework for developing and implementing security strategies and identifying potential risks. There is a call at IMO to broaden the scope of the ISPS Code to consider organised crime, and I would recommend that the Canadian representatives on IMO engage and support this initiative. As it relates to security containers, I want to talk a little bit about the process of packing and moving containers through a terminal. In general around the world, and also in Canada, there is no X-ray or scanning of export boxes unless the country of destination has a security requirement for a preload scan. This is because most border controls are focused on the import of illicit materials, not the export. Typically, a shipping container is packed at an off-site location. The paperwork is done, which includes a self-declaration of what's inside. The container is closed and marked with a customs seal. When a container arrives at a terminal, either by truck or rail, the container number is matched to the booking number. The customs seal is physically checked to see that it hasn't been broken. The serial number of the seal is noted against the container. Then the container is put in the stacking area for export. Neither the terminal operator nor Port Authority have the right to hold or open a container unless directed by the shipper, the shipping line or CBSA. In terms of documentation, there is a bill of lading, which is a legal contract between the shipper and the carrier that shows ownership, and there is a cargo manifest which lists the contents of what is claimed to be inside the box. On the manifest document, you will find words like "said to contain," because the only one who knows for sure what is in the container is the one who packed it. If we consider the effectiveness of scanning export boxes, if the manifest says the box contains household goods but a scan reveals a car inside, then it's reasonable that enforcement agencies know they should be inspecting the container. But if the scan of a box that has a car inside and the manifest says there is a car inside, there is no way of knowing if that car is stolen without opening the container and looking to see the VIN matches the ownership documents. And even that check might not catch a VIN that has been tampered with. The point is, spending a lot of money on scanners may not fix the problem, and scanning every single container may not fix the problem. What we do know is that scanning containers takes time, resources and trained people, and it's simply not realistic to scan every single export container or even the majority of them. The other gap is the port security clearance. In many other jurisdictions, security credentialing is a requirement for anyone who must access a secure area more than once in a calendar year. That's not the case in Canada. Currently, there is no consistency in maritime transport security clearance cards between different ports. Every port creates its own card, and the inconsistency makes the system vulnerable to fraud. Other jurisdictions have centralised systems with standardised cards which make it easier to detect forgery and compare a card against a centralised database. The federal budget proposes funding for Transport Canada and the RCMP to administer a centralised transportation security clearance program, which is a positive step. We are respectful of the fact that people are concerned about auto theft and the threat of violence in communities affected by this problem. We need a broad solution that is realistic about the level of control required to effect positive change. Relying on port security as the last line of defence may not be as effective when considering such well-organised criminals. We need to consider a more integrated approach to port security that includes all levels of government and also considers the export of drugs and other illicit goods and people. Thank you.
Mrs. Murha Hassani, I hope I pronounced that half right.
Yes.
Is that okay?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you. So I'm the co-director of SHIELD, Automotive Cybersecurity Center of Excellence. This center was established in 2020, right at the onset of the pandemic. But however, we've been researching this challenges associated with automotive security and in general Internet of Things security since 2012 or so. We basically created this center to address three key areas that we saw lacking, especially back at 2012 or 2020 when we were talking with different ranges of people. They were looking at us in amazement and wondering what it is that we are talking about when we were talking about the issues surrounding the security of automotive. A lot of times it's been mistaken with safety features in vehicle, which are two different basically challenges and issues, interrelated but not exactly the same. So SHIELD basically is working with automotive industry. We have partners that are coming. We can basically offer solutions for their immediate needs and challenges. But as to how much of the offer solutions they employ, that remains with them. We basically, at this center, other than offering technological solutions for the problems that are facing the industry, we also offer training and education, respecting the issue and the challenges that the auto theft has created in Canada. Basically, one of the more challenging issues in terms of the security is lack of knowledgeable people and ability to attract young minds into this field. So we are trying actively to remove the barriers in the field and allow the younger generation to come into the field, as well as trying to upskill the current workforce that is in the workplace in automotive to be able to basically understand the new ecosystem of the vehicle. And we are also, as much as possible, try to talk with the policymakers. We are attending in and are members of different standards committees and transferring our knowledge and basically issues that we have experienced and learned to may hopefully become reflective in the advanced science and advanced standards and policies, basically. I'm going back again to the issue of biggest challenges in the automotive that as I mentioned, is lack of talent. We certainly have a very serious void in our workforce currently. A lot of organizations that are working in the automotive industry do not have the people with necessary skills, which sometimes showcase itself in the products that are coming. There are, however, newer standards that are developed, and car makers are slowly adhering to those, especially in July 2024. Some of the world harmonization standards is basically they're going to enforce some of their standards. So with this, we are hoping that there will be more investment in training and education of the students and professionals, basically. Unfortunately, the day that automotive cybersecurity becomes an issue arrived earlier than we predicted. Our prediction was that with the rise of AI, we will have more devastation and more problems, especially with the fleets of vehicles. But auto theft, certainly because it's a public issue, has basically created this attention to the details related to the automotive cybersecurity. We're hoping that working with different organizations, different institutions, private and public sectors, we can rise to some of the challenges in this field. And thank you for having me today.
Thank you, Professor Mahasani. Now we'll move right into questioning with Mr. Shipley for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. I would like to first start with Mr. Gray. Mr. Gray, you may have touched on this, but I just want to recap. In your experience, what percentage of shipping containers would you say the CBSA is scanning at the Port of Halifax?
In the Port of Halifax, it's probably only somewhere around between 3 and 5%. It's not a large volume. And that's only import containers. So they don't...
Sorry, yeah, I meant export. If I didn't say that.
Export would be zero.
So there's absolutely zero scanning of export. Okay. So knowing that then, do you have any statistics? Has there ever been a car successfully seized at the port?
Not that I'm aware of. I have heard anecdotally that cars may have moved through the port, but I haven't seen a seizure of a vehicle in the port.
How long have you been there, Mr. Gray?
This is my 5th year in the port.
5th, I'm sorry?
5th.
5,
yeah.
Okay, thank you. Do you think that the security clearance program administered by Transport Canada for employees working at your port are adequate for preventing the infiltration to the public sector?
No, I don't. And if I can expand on that, is to my point, other jurisdictions, and I come from Australia, so similar jurisdiction. The security cards that exist, if you have a requirement to access a security regulated area more than once in a calendar year, then you're required to have a transport security clearance card. That means transport drivers, workers that come down and do maintenance in the place. It doesn't matter what where you're from. If you have to access a security regulated thing more than once a year, you must have a security clearance. The other point is that the card for the Port of Montreal and the card for the Port of Halifax, whilst it'll have some similarities of information on it, they're different. We can have different colour backings and that. In other jurisdictions, they have security hologram films which can only be purchased from the government, and then they're put on the card, and every card is identical throughout the country. So it is very difficult to forge, from an organised crime point of view, very difficult to forge because you can pick that up through the hologram systems. We don't have that in Canada.
Thank you. My next question is going to be, and I think, Chair, you did it much better than myself, Ms. Sani. I hope I'm close on that.
Mitra is fine. Just call me Mitra. That's
thank you,
fine.
Mitra. Thank you. Obviously, but what you're saying, the Chair did do a better job than I did on that one, so I apologize. I'd like to just first have a quick discussion. I brought up an example of a carjacking a while ago that happened in the Toronto area, and it's been kind of maybe misused for what my example was a couple times in this committee. I had mentioned some very young people, one as young as 11. There was 3 of them, maybe 4. I can't recall exactly. And it's been brought up a couple of times that they were so young they could get the technology and stole that vehicle. They didn't use any technology. They opened the door, pulled out the driver, beat him and stabbed him and drove away. I just want to make sure that was clear. There was no technology used by those perpetrators of that. So my next question, Mitra, was that we've heard from several witnesses that the age of car thieves is becoming quite young. While we know that many of these thieves obtain stolen vehicles through violent means such as carjacking and home invasions, I'm wondering how easy is it for a young person to obtain and learn how to steal a vehicle other than, as I said, pulling a driver out and driving away?
Stealing the cars basically has always been a little bit easy, but these days, because of the information sharing and availability to resources online, information are much easier and readily available. And let's admit, our newer generation are more tech savvy than some of us. So if they are seeking information, they can easily find those information. There are different resources, and there is actually no way to stop those resources from sharing the information about the weaknesses of certain technologies. I guess that there is no way for censoring or those data sources. But coming to say that, there is always also stories of young hackers who hack into extremely secure databases and data sets. So it's always basically a little bit of interest and basically the intrigue for the younger generation to go for these newer ways to find information and employ it.
Thank you.
I'll stop here, I guess.
Thank you. 1 minute. I'll make this very, very quick then. From your perspective, what recommendations do you have for manufacturers to improve the vehicle's resilience to getting stolen or cyber attacks?
Unfortunately, this is not just one advice. They have to remember that although we like to have our cars to be smoother, have a lot of safety features, be connected and do a lot of amazing things, the manufacturing of automotive vehicle has turned into a super complex issue, as well as the whole engineering and concept. So I'm afraid there is not just a very, one advice that I can give them. You usually ask them to apply a secure by design principle, but we are seeing that even that design principle and engineering basically protocol fails to secure such a complex system.
Do I have any time?
13 seconds.
I have 13 seconds. So you're saying basically no matter what they can do, they're still going to get stolen?
Unfortunately, there is no way to secure a system or a car 100% and be saying that it's done and we are okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shipley. Mr. Shefke, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I'd like to add my thanks to our witnesses for appearing before us today. Ms. Mirhassani, I'm going to be directing my questions to you today. I want to thank you for bringing your expertise to our committee on this very important issue. We've had the car manufacturers or representatives of the car manufacturers appear before committee, and I asked them questions about how much they were investing in research and development to make their cars harder to steal. They weren't immediately forthcoming with that information. I learned that there was submissions to INDU committee, the industry committee, where they were asked similar questions about what they were doing to make their vehicles harder to steal. And I've read all of those, and basically none of them were forthcoming on what they were doing, citing that they didn't want to share this information as it would tell the criminals what they were doing to stop them from stealing their vehicles. There was one, however, that I came across that was submitted by Ms. Audrey Depot, who's a senior advisor for public policy and development for Tesla, who, without even being requested to submit information, did so anyway because Tesla's actually quite proud about what they've done to make their vehicles, according to the Highway Loss Data Institute of the United States, between 2020 and 2022, the hardest vehicles to steal. And we're not talking about the high-end vehicles, we're talking about the Model 3, which actually comes at a manufacturer's suggested retail price below the average now. There's a couple of things that they've done, Ms. Mirhassani, included in the basic vehicles, whether it's the Sentry mode, which has a live camera. So whenever there's suspicious activity around the vehicle, it sends the owner on their phone a live feed of what's happening around their vehicle. They've also included relay attack mitigations, and we heard from the Montreal police as well as the Sûreté du Québec that we have 15 to 20-year-olds that are buying $100 gadgets on Amazon and stealing the messaging that's coming off the vehicle. Well, they have something that mitigates that attack, and they have what's called PIN to drive, which allows the driver to secure a 4-digit verification code that must be entered before the vehicle can be driven. My question to you is, what amongst what Tesla is doing to be the most successful, and by the way, I don't drive a Tesla, I have no interest in Tesla, but I'm actually very intrigued at what they've been able to do. What is Tesla doing that the other manufacturers simply cannot get or are not doing? And that's my first question to you.
Well, in terms of identifying the differences between Tesla and the other car makers, they both make cars, but they are making cars very differently from each other. So for our Tesla has its own weaknesses that I'm not going to disclose here. But in terms of the auto theft, yes, they had a little bit better success. They also have bounty hunting and participate in a lot of competitions and basically encouraging people to help them in identification of flaws of their systems. The same sometimes goes for the other car makers as well. So some of the technology is easier to be adopted by the other car makers, but remembering that their manufacturing style between Tesla and the other car makers are completely different, that renders the ability of some of those auto car makers to jump easily into modifying their process. So as a result, they are a little bit slower in adopting solutions that, for example,
so Ms. Mirhassani, I'm just on limited time here, and I'm really trying to get as much out of your expertise into this report as possible. If we're looking at ways we can strengthen our ports, we're looking at ways we can strengthen law enforcement. One of the aspects I really want to get to the heart of here is what we can do as far as regulation is concerned, because it hasn't been updated we've heard almost 20 years, right? What do we need to be doing as a government? What would a regulation that we can put in place look like that would be most effective in producing vehicles that are harder to steal? What would be included in that regulation? And what would that have to look like for it to be effective now, but also to be effective in the future?
Sure. So although maybe in Canada, the regulation hasn't been adjusted, but standards, the SAE standards and ISO standards and the World Forum for Harmonization of Vehicle Regulations, they've been recently adjusted. So those are basically in Europe are being enforced starting July 2024, which means that the vehicle has to have the secure by design principle and some level of testing for security incorporated before they can start selling the new car models.
And based on your experience, will that be effective in curbing the rise in vehicle thefts that we're seeing in Europe, in the United States, and in Canada and all around the world?
I'm a cynic and a researcher, so my answer is has that bias in it. I always go by the fact that no car or no vehicle is 100% secure. So if we close the door on this side, there will be another way to open it.
And one last question, if the chair will permit, if we were to adopt those similar standards that have just passed in Europe, would that be beneficial to Canadians?
Yes, certainly.
Thank you very much for your testimony today.
Thank you both. We're moving on to Ms. Michaud, please, for 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for being here. Firstly, I'd just like to make sure that you can hear the interpretation before I move forward with my questions in French. Great, okay. So I'm going to continue in the same theme. So following the Auto Theft Summit, the government announced in the recent budget its intention to amend the Telecommunications Act on the import and export of technology used for cars. So this would remove devices that are used to steal cars. So remove them from the Canadian market. There were quick reactions to this. Juniper One is a company that designed some of this technology and said that RDS technology, which would be targeted by the government in this new law, is very basic technology. And they said that you actually can't use this type of flipper technology to steal recent models of cars. We also know that oftentimes thieves don't need to use this type of technology. Someone can hijack a car through violence, for example. So is this the best way to move forward in your opinion? Maybe this is one thing that we could do, but we will need a variety of measures? Or do you feel that we're simply wasting our time creating laws around these devices and that organized crime will continue despite this?
Unfortunately, I believe that banning those technological devices is not going to help. The thieves are certainly not going to abide by law. They will get it from other sources. What it did only was that created a little bit of panic in my students, saying that, so what are we going to learn to, what are we going to use to learn? Banning those devices is not going to impact the auto theft. It's only going to probably harm the training and education. And one small note, yes, those devices cannot open some of the cars, but we tested it, and unfortunately, it works on some of the new car models.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you. The head of a company that came to speak to us in committee talked about anti-theft technology that was implemented by a UK automaker. So these are systems that prevent someone from getting access to the controller area network. And apparently this is relatively simple technology that can prevent auto theft. And these automakers in the UK saw that some insurance companies actually stopped insuring some of these vehicles, and so they didn't move forward with this technology. So do you think that Canadian automakers should move forward with this type of technology? And do you believe that we will get to that point where insurance companies are not insuring certain vehicle models because they are stolen too often? What do you think about this?
So I'm going to not being, I don't think I can answer about the insurance companies on their behalf. I guess they have to answer that part. But yes, there are certainly some technologies that we can use to basically make it more difficult. The thing is that, yes, although any system is not 100% secure, but if we make it difficult or create a process that takes longer to attack or get into the vehicle, that could be a deterrent for whoever's trying to steal that car. So in a way, if a car takes 15 minutes, 20 minutes to steal because of some of the principal challenges that are placed in on the way, that will deter the thieves. And as to, unfortunately, I can't say that what the insurance companies can do. I can only answer on the technology side.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Mr. Gray. A question concerning the Port of Halifax. We know that the situation is very different from that in Montreal. I know that you have been asked lots of questions because, especially in Montreal, this is a hub for exporting stolen vehicles because of its location. So I want to make sure that I understood what you said earlier. You said that focusing on port security would be a last resort to fight auto theft. Did I understand correctly? And if yes, why did you say that?
I was saying if you were relying on the port as a last resort, as your only defence, it would not be very successful because of the number of issues around documentation, not knowing what, we don't physically open every box because it's sealed prior to arrival. So if that was your only line of defence, it would not be a very successful one, and we need a broader one. To me, one of the problems is we don't have good data transfer from agencies to ports and terminals. So we can't access CBSA data because of the way the legislation is written. Once it goes into CBSA, it can't come out. So therefore, we have issues in data sharing amongst ports, terminal operators and supply chain. So things like that would help notice the anomalies, if you like. If more data could be shared amongst the agencies and players and the stakeholders, that would be there. The other side is if you don't have a good security card or clearance system that's deep enough into the system, organised crime will get hold of trusted insiders or threaten people within the chain, and that makes it much easier to pass through. Boxes will be missed on that sort of thing. So to me, that the increase in data and also broadening the card for more people, and what the IMO legislation that they're talking about, or the IMO rules, is that your affiliation or belonging to organisations that are affiliated with organised crime will discredit you from being able to get a security card. And that is a big shift that's coming in many other countries, and it's a really important shift. Even if you don't look at the contraband, and I've raised human trafficking and drugs as additional to cars, just the fact that terrorism can use organised crime as a means of passing dangerous goods. So it's something that has to happen.
Ms. Michaud. Mr. McGregor, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'd like to start my first questions to Shield. Professor, you had mentioned in your opening statements, you had touched on artificial intelligence and the fact that it is going to lead to a lot more problems in the future. We've certainly at this committee have touched on the subject of AI, and I have spoken to stakeholders who are experts in the field, and there is a great deal of concern on how, we are really at the beginning stages of how this technology can be employed, but the use by malicious actors in developing code to foment cybersecurity attacks is a very real concern. And, as you'd mentioned the Internet of Things, of how so many of our household devices and, of course, vehicles are increasingly going to be connected to the Internet. And I know from my work on the Agriculture Committee, that is increasingly the case for a lot of our farm equipment as well, that sort of real-time data link so that farmers can know exactly how their machines are operating. I'm just wondering if you could touch a little bit on that. And do you see also, I know of AI as an offensive tool, but do you foresee also its applications in defense? And can you expand a little bit more on that in this particular problem?
Sure. Yes. Well, AI is currently used in both cases, in both sides, as a tool to create defense and basically identify for example, if you through some of the very simple applications, face recognition on your phone or some of that might basically have the AIs to some capacity. And also it's used also on the other side to as an offensive to attack the other systems. So it's a tool. So it basically plays both sides. What we are at Shield are very, very much concerned is the AI is usually used as a very good tool, but as long as it's working. So what if someone or a malicious actor attacks that tool and breaks it? That will create a lot more problems, essentially. So there are a lot. We have been advocating about the responsible and secure AI a lot. As these devices, as AI is basically going now everywhere, it's left to its own devices. No one is thinking about protecting the AI unit itself to be able to make sure that it's working appropriately or as intended. And the problem is that if we are not securing and are taking care of the AI unit, that is going to be used as for protecting us. If that AI center, its own activity gets attacked, then basically the consequences could be a little bit more damaging than what we are seeing in some cases.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I just wanted to move on to another question. That you are very knowledgeable about the technology that exists in trying to deter car thefts, and I agree with you. No technology is going to be 100% foolproof, but some are better than others and can greatly decrease the chances that a successful theft will happen. My colleague, Mr. Schiefke, in previous committee hearings has sort of alluded to the profits that car manufacturers are making and looking at the sticker price of cars. Given your knowledge on the existing technology that's out there, the costs associated with it, in your opinion, what would be a reasonable amount for a car company to invest in a vehicle, like a dollar figure per unit, to make sure that it had a much less likelihood of getting stolen?
That is a very hard question to answer. I don't have that number about the actual numbers that can go into the vehicle to make it secure. So unfortunately, I can't answer that question.
But is there anything you could add, like more broadly speaking, like, we're trying, because we've heard from a number of witnesses who have said that car manufacturers are not living up to their end of the bargain in this whole issue. In big picture, yes, there are certainly things that the car manufacturers can do. Some are taking it more seriously than the others. Some of the cars companies and OEMs actually started looking into the issues of cybersecurity since 2016 and before. However, the technology is advancing much faster than we can find the loopholes of the security and fixing it. So a lot of times when the car is in market, the security loopholes are just identified. So we are a little bit playing the game of a cat and mouse in this feature, and that could be one of the reasons that the car makers are falling behind, because the process of making or adjusting their technology might take them some time to get into the market. So that could be one of the reasons.
We're now moving on to the second round, and I'm going to have a hard stop so we can get at least 4 questionnaires in. So, Mr. Couric, you're up, please, first for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I'll be splitting my time with Mr. Viersen here. So, Mr. Gray, a couple of questions for you. You had mentioned before that when it comes to Transport Canada security clearance, currently connections to organized crime are not a consideration when somebody is granted security clearance to a port.
Yeah, so currently it's focused around weapons-based crimes, so things that are associated with terrorism, because the transport security card came in from IMO's ruling, which was based around prevention of terrorism. So their focus at that time was really around weapons or violent-related crimes. Only now IMO is saying there's too much evidence that says organised crimes related to terrorism, and that should be extended. But
I'd say it's certainly past due for that recognition. That is astounding that is not the case, and certainly something that needs to be addressed. I'm curious, could you provide any data as to the number of interactions that your port has with CBSA, the RCMP, CSIS, CSEC, other federal investigative entities in terms of containers that might be outgoing from your port? We've heard a lot about Montreal, we've heard a lot about Vancouver, but I'm just curious if, do you have that information, or is that something that you could provide to this committee?
I could have a look into it, but from my own interactions, we very seldom talk about cargo going out of the port. Most of the focus is about cargo coming into the port. Right. And even then, it's kept very close to the chest. There was a recent announcement about a drug bust in Halifax. We weren't aware of, as the Port Authority, we weren't aware of that occurring until after its event. So they keep that sort of information very close. Something I'm not used to from previous jurisdiction, where we have a trusted information network and multiple agencies come together and share information around multiple things, including terrorist information, but also other organised crime information.
So just one final question, and just yes or no, if I could, is that something that needs to be improved in Canada?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Pearson.
Hello, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the witnesses being here today. To the professor, I'm old enough to remember, I'm an auto mechanic. I worked at a Chrysler dealer for a long time, and I remember when the SCIM code came in 1998 on the Jeep Grand Cherokee, and we watched as that SCIM technology came, we watched like just a nosedive in vehicle thefts in general. But with that, over time, we've also lost the column lock. I don't know if people remember this. You used to have to put the key in the side just to get the steering wheel to turn, and that most modern vehicles don't have that anymore. And this is more of a hardware rather than software situation. Is there any desire from the industry to bring back the column lock or other hardware? There's been a lot of discussion around software, but is there any discussions around hardware pieces to kind of prevent theft?
Hardware is, just remembering that hardware is also easy to capture. So those mechanical car keys are also, you have the ability to reproduce and remanufacture them. So if you're thinking about organized crimes, they certainly have access to generating those car keys mechanically and distributing them with their system. As to if industry is planning to bring that in, I am not aware of such motivation.
Okay, so like the column lock is just an example of a hardware theft deterrent. You don't know of anything like we see the aftermarket steering wheel lock or the people they put the club on the wheel. Those are aftermarket. Is there any desire from the industry to bring in something else that we haven't heard of yet?
I'm not aware of anything in that regards.
Okay, the SCIM key that Chrysler came out with in 1998. What had been until like 2015, maybe you can correct me on that. Up until 2015, people hadn't been able to get around it. Today, now they can just duplicate the key, the electronic side of that key, really quickly, and so it's basically made it mute. Is there any light at the end of the tunnel around reintroduction of something like that?
Very quickly, Ms.
I'm not sure if they are going to bring those keys, and if there is any intention of that, I'm not aware of that. But at this stage of the information availability, I'd say that even those mechanical car keys can be manufactured rather easily.
Thank you. Thank you. We're moving on to Mr. McKinnon, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to the witnesses for being here. So I'm going to direct my questions to Mr. Gray. So we're particularly interested in the ports because we see this as a last line of defense for interdicting the export of stolen vehicles. And I understand this doesn't really apply to you. You don't have data in this regard, but perhaps we could, I want to look a little bit further up the logistic chain. You mentioned many of these containers are filled in at terminals in the vicinity, presumably. I'm wondering if any of these terminals have some sort of a trusted status or bonded relationship so that you can decide whether, based on whoever filled the container, this manifest may be more or less reliable.
Yeah, thank you. Some packing houses are customs warehousing, so that they are they've gone through a customs system to have customs brokerage. So there would be some that are more reliable than others. I would think you would adopt it the same as the way you risk assess import cargoes, is looking at where they're coming from, who's packed it, who's the shipping line. You take a similar approach if if they put good electronic seals or that sort of thing, they're a reliable, trusted customs broker, then it would be less likely that you're going to have a problem there. If you're coming something that's been packed by an individual, then that would be a higher risk profile, or a warehouse that you're unaware. Again, that information the port doesn't have, but CBSA would have that information going through, but we don't get told where the origin is from that cargo. We aren't given that information.
Yeah. So would that be helpful to you to be required to be offered that information, so that if and when you are able to or had need to scan export containers, that you might be able to filter them on that basis?
That sharing of information would help the risk assessment process. So yes, it all helps. The more information we get, the more we can help, or the terminal can make assessments, or if CBSA is advising us these are higher risks and they want them scanned, then that would be a process that would help.
Yeah. So who is responsible, if any, for verifying that the manifest matches the contents? You know, who is there someone that can be held accountable if they find out that there's a significant material error or discrepancy there?
The person that had packed and declared the goods is the person responsible. So, but in most cases, the discovery that that's not the case is only at the destination port. So there's no way to see in a container other than scanning. And as I said, if the paperwork's been falsified as well, you could have a situation, for example, in a car that it says it's a car and the paperwork matches it, so that's fine. You don't know whether the car was stolen or the ownership was correct.
So who puts the customs seals on these containers? Is that CBSA themselves, or is it some agent, some bonded or trusted person?
It's whoever packs the container or the customs broker that's associated with it. So not necessarily a trusted network with customs. So,
yeah. So I mean, it seems really important that we could be able to identify who placed a seal on it and whether they, in fact, verified the contents of the container. Are they able to verify the contents of the container, do you think?
The person who seals it should be verifying the contents, or who declares on the paperwork should be verifying it. But again, in an organised crime situation, there's a lot of trusted insiders, so the person who's declaring could be a trusted insider. So unless you've got multiple people in the chain who are testing that process, it could still slip through the process. That's the nature of these smuggling, whatever it's going to be that you're smuggling, is that it's trusted insiders that are the ones quite often responsible for falsifying documents. So unless you're going to open every container, which is the same as import. We don't open every container. We don't scan every container that comes in. It's risk assessment based. You'd have to take a similar approach, a risk assessment based approach. The more you could do to validate the security credentials of people involved in handling the cargo along the chain, the more likely you are to reduce the number of trusted insiders that you would have in the system.
Yeah. So, I guess that's what I'm driving at, that we need a way to filter the vast number of containers that we have that we need to look at and be able to identify who is responsible. Would you see this as a recommendation we should put forward, that the logistic chain and the that the provenance of these containers be provided to the ports?
And thank you, Mr. Gray, for your cooperation. Ms. Michaud, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to stay in the same theme as Mr. McKinnon. Earlier, you talked about solutions that you were suggesting, including better information sharing between different partners, the Port Authority, border services agencies, and law enforcement. Law enforcement that spoke to us said that this would be a good way to move forward, that we can review the security clearance accreditation process. And I didn't know that CBSA, or rather Transport Canada, deals with this. And the minister explained how this works and how it can be improved concerning the security clearances. And then there was talks about CBSA's mandate, that they focus more on imports rather than exports, and all containers that leave the country are not necessarily inspected. So should we change CBSA's mandate? I don't know if we have the means to do this. I don't know if the agency has the human resources for this, but should we be focusing more on exports? And as Mr. McKinnon mentioned, should we be looking into who is sealing these containers before we send them off to another country? Should we look into how many, what the time frame is within which we can change the declaration of the contents of the container? Is that something we should look into as well?
I think it's important that most customs authorities around the world are focused on protecting a country, so goods coming in. So whether it's quarantine from bringing pest bugs and other things, or illicit material in. So their primary focus is about protecting a country. So their resources are allocated that way. So I suspect from a resource allocation that would be challenging to take a complete focus on export. It's cooperation between countries' enforcement agencies that is important. So if you're going to try and stop the movement, that relationship with other international customs agencies to say, look, we have a problem here of export, we're trying to get hold of it, but we need your assistance in blocking it at the receiver end. That would help. So it's not so much us doing it all the work, but it's a combination of work. But more information along the line, I think better security clearances will reduce the risk and then make it more able to do, as I mentioned, risk-based assessment, and therefore a portion of the export market could be checked based on a risk assessment. So.
Merci.
Thank you.
That's it. So we're moving on. We want to thank our